Should I be worried about capitalism changing, or am I overthinking it? Hey guys, I'm new to the forum, just finished and on to now, but something I'm really worried about with starting to be an entrepreneur and can't get out of my mind, so hopefully someone can help me clear my head. Is anyone else worried about liberals wanting to change capitalism? I hear they think the current system is unfair and want to change it, which sounds scary. Is it going to ruin it for entrepreneurs in America, or is this something that I'm overthinking and shouldn't worry about? If you haven't heard anything about this, then it probably means it's not as big a deal as I think. Thanks. Of course not. Who else will pay for all this? Something to think about, but not something to block your way. It's kinda like saying, why should I build a business when an asteroid might kill us all one day? Also, the anti-capitalists are a big voice in America, backstopped by big donors and big politics. They have a big bullhorn, but they are a small minority in real America. Also, you can shift your approach toward social entrepreneurship or conscientiousness capitalism. For instance, offer a % of profit to a cause you find worthy. This might appeal to those who think the market is as large as the bullhorn. Are you reading a lot of fake news, or are you spreading fake news? Hopefully reading a lot of fake news. Lol, I don't want any of this to happen obviously, so I'm glad you guys feel this way. That's a good point. End of the world stuff like the asteroid might kill us all one day is definitely a motivation killer. And sorry, I just overthink everything. Switch your news feed or go no news temporarily. Delete your Facebook feed. It will make you feel better. Yes, there are people who hate everything capitalist. For the most part they just make noise though. The best thing you can do to preserve capitalism and free-ish markets is participate in them. Second best thing, get other people to participate too. Show people that entrepreneurs are the ones bringing products and services to their neighborhoods, and that directly affects quality of life. Next best after that, help out some free market non-profits that want to improve the human condition by making poor people richer, as opposed to liberal ones that gasbag about their zero-sum world where successful people are evil. And are decent starting points if you're interested. Don't let them distract you from starting a business though. Lololololx 1,000,000 dude, almost every country in the world is capitalist, except for North Korea, and maybe some others. Don't listen to the labels. America will forever be a capitalist country. Even the liberals you describe wouldn't be able to stop it, nor would they want to. Politicians all rely on money from business to get or keep their positions. Where do you think all that tax money comes from? Even in my Canada, which many people think is more liberal, the day business disappears is the day society collapses. The best places to live here have the most business activity. People aren't so hell-bent on their own self-destruction that they would abolish capitalism. As much as I wish I could agree, it's pretty easy to find people who can be convinced to destroy themselves economically. Venezuela is a disaster because people with no understanding of economics took the reins. And they have supporters even now, with the people starving and to swim to the nearest island, because their chance of survival is higher that way than staying and starving. I know several people in the US who believe business is inherently evil. Only wise and appropriately diverse people in government can distribute what little the planet has to offer, in their minds. A cousin of mine, fresh from a liberal arts education in Ireland, explained with a straight face how she so admired Mao's farm programs, and some of Lenin's wise policies. People believe what they believe. That said, it should absolutely not stop anyone from starting a business. If you think wackos are gaining power and control, you should also gain power and control. Business is your tool for doing that. Plus, it's more fun than most of the other options. You made some points I agree with. Yes, Venezuela is an example of a country destroying itself economically. It mostly went bad right after Hugo Chavez died. However, here is where I disagree. Venezuela and America are different cases. Despite what the media will tell you, America is quite prosperous, and is only getting better. Many people in America have decent jobs, and are comfortable enough with their lives. Even if people tell you they hate capitalism, they have too many creature comforts they wouldn't be ready to give up. Venezuela is a different case. You have a fed-up, starving population with literally nothing to lose, and power-hungry tyrants running the country. The last thing they would ever do is give power to the angry people they've oppressed and exploited for souls. Not so much that the leaders of Venezuela don't understand economics, even though that is true. The main point is they are assholes, lol. If you look at history and even current times, poverty is what breeds tyranny. When people are hungry, they get violent and restless. When people get violent and restless, countries become unstable. When counties become unstable, leaders try to keep power using ruthless means. America, despite having many hungry people, is far from a hungry country. They're not going to break the system that's been working so wonderfully. Don't you realize this exact thing could have been said before the communist takeover of any previously capitalist regime? That didn't stop nearly a third of the world being under communist rule at one point. 1950, most prosperous country in Latin America, fourth highest per capita in the world, Bolivar currency was one of the strongest, stablest in Latin America. 1995, 70% of population live in poverty. 2006, foreign affairs, no. It didn't. Mostly went bad right after Hugo Chavez died. They just entered another circle of hell. Being scared and overthinking is a waste of time and emotional energy, but at the same time it's idiotic to dismiss someone's concern with LOL. Bad things are real. And just because you've lived in a safe little bubble until now, doesn't mean future risks are zero. Agree with Ninja Arcade here. Most communist takeovers were rooted in extreme crisis, social unrest or coups. For that to happen in the US, there should be a larger depression than they saw in the 30s. There's simply no way that the USA will suddenly change into the United Socialist States of America. People just like to bitch, but no one wants to trade their fancy latte iPhone lifestyle with a sober Soviet I only have one pair of shoes. Funny they call socialists liberals in America BTW. Because almost all capitalist countries have a liberal government, some mix it even with socialist. It's all rooted in capitalism after all. Tsarist Russia was underdeveloped, impoverished, and run by an incompetent tyrant. Disgruntled members of the imperial military were mostly responsible for the takeover, not liberals getting into power. Again, you're confusing the types of countries Tsarist Russia was and modern-day USA is. Sorry man, I didn't mean LOL at you. LOL was directed at the people who think capitalism is the root of all evils, yet have benefited tremendously from it. I can see now that I should have specified that though. I'm very liberal, and also very capitalist. They aren't at all mutually exclusive, though financially I'm probably more moderate. That being said, historically, capitalism and taxation and corporate structure and everything associated with the flow of financial and intellectual resources is always in a constant state of flux. If you look back to the 1920s, there are similar kinds of apprehensions to the scary liberals. And the market has changed a ton since then. And undoubtedly will change a ton in the next century. I'd worry less about scary liberals or tight-ass conservatives and focus on the value you can bring to the world and the markets. That will have a far stronger effect. Modern liberalism is actually a pretty strong market indicator on what a demographic of people values. Have you seen the huge boom in organics? Organics have a ton of drawbacks and may environmentally be awash compared to standard produce. Yet, those liberals will pay an arm and a leg for it. Anytime you have a group of anyone who's like-minded, you've probably found yourself an interesting market. So focus on your product and what the market wants. Good luck. Loud politicians aren't the problem. Idiot voters are. I am concerned that a wide majority of voting public support 75+% taxes on the wealthy only basically defined as not them. I am concerned that a wide voting majority supports a retroactive wealth tax. I am concerned when I hear that a voting majority supports a 100% death tax. Yes, I am concerned. But no more concerned than I have been for more than a decade. I have always held the notion that when this country no longer makes sense for me to live in, I will leave. I control my life, not politics. America's poor are obese. Excellent advice. I also worry about that. But like said, it shouldn't block you from being an entrepreneur. After all, the USA is founded on liberty and capitalism has always been an integral part in American life. So despite some population want to change the current system, some Americans, real Americans, will resist and defend the freedom they long enjoyed. And yes, there are many capitalist countries aside from USA. My country, Philippines, is also a capitalist country. I suggest just focus on your entrepreneurial journey and don't listen too much on the news. They just play on your mind and confuse you. This is a good thing. Snowflakes are the easiest ones to separate from their money. Don't be one of them, be a producer. Fulfill their fears and insecurities, ditch yours. No problem. I didn't read it in a negative light. Side note. Both parties should be enriched at the end of a transaction. Win-win. That is the premise of capitalism. Yes, win-win is the premise of capitalism. Even if we give way to the fact that capitalism has holes out of human imperfection, corporate greed, rip-offs, irresponsibility to workers, customers and environment, among others, only capitalism so far gives every people a chance to pull themselves out of poverty and improve their lot in life. I don't understand why some people don't understand this. And I'm not talking about poor people who knew nothing because they didn't finish grade school and can't afford school or books to read. I am talking about college students, and especially I'm talking about, obviously with exceptions. They preach the evils of capitalism in their classes, highlighting how businesses exploits their workers, how the bourgeoisie exploits the proletariat. But so far, I never heard any one of them talk about the Gulag, Soviet Union, North Korea, forced labor from these dictatorial states, and economic collapse that follows after. I do not understand if they are just naive and hoping for a Marxist utopia, which premise is flawed from the very beginning, lol. Or do they really want to exchange their freedoms with communist dictatorship? It makes me scratch my head. Greed, rip-offs, etc. predate capitalism by centuries, so they should be no surprise. The real innovation is that when people are given rights, and when property can be freely exchanged, people thrive despite the underlying problems caused by bad actors. Professors like to extend from theoretical frameworks. Marx has become a popular choice for their theoretical basis. In the US, it reaches the point of absurdity. Graduate school was akin to political catechism at times. The attractive thing about Marx, to them, is that while he talks about community, and fairness, and putting the tools in the hands of the workers, and what not, he also relies on wise and benevolent elites to decide what is best for the community. This makes professors blush and get all huffy because, in their minds, they are the aforementioned elites. It's like making yourself the aristocracy without having to admit you're putting yourself above other people. Very attractive. Also worth noting, capitalism was a term coined by Marxists as a slander against modern classical liberal values. What it really refers to is property rights and the moral rights to free action and life choices. These rights are seen as damaging or dangerous because, in their theoretical framework, an individual cannot be trusted. A small number of elites deciding what is best for the collective? Sure, they can be trusted all day. I heard Nicholas II wasn't a tyrant, but definitely incompetent. He just didn't give a shit about ruling, and eventually abdicated the throne. But it was too late cause the seeds of revolution were planted and he got killed anyway. The emancipation of the serfs happened in 1861, and the Russian government hoped a free market economy would blossom. Seems like it didn't quite work out. Guess not everyone had the entrepreneurial spirit. Some serfs bought the land they lived on from their former masters. Many serfs couldn't afford it and basically became employees who now had to pay rent. It's all very complex and I won't pretend to understand all the economic nuances of that. By the early 1900s, many were indeed impoverished, and I believe land ownership inequality played a big role. The rich landowners spent much of their time out of country in places like Paris, and didn't give a shit about the state of the masses either. I guess when a lot of people collectively feel like they can't survive any other way, they start a revolution. Maybe some people don't give a shit about business or entrepreneurship and just wanna own a small plot of land, farm to sustain themselves, pay a little tax to the powers that be, and live life. Or I could be totally wrong about all this. LOL. It is about things that are beyond the control of the system. Free market is and will be. If you are afraid to fail, you are unfair. Nothing in life worth living is fair. People saying things will be fair cannot deliver and will be unfair. Capitalism. It is. It is not going to have any concern. Look to provide value. Look to produce before you consume. Find that fair. It is beyond what they consider. Get into. I think you know the history better than me, haha. But Nicholas II was called Nicholas the Bloody. He frequently had people assassinated and in general used violence to suppress his opponents. Not that this was uncharacteristic of monarchs in the old days. Many monarchs were weak rulers who relied on fear to keep their subjects in line. But yeah, Russia lacked the infrastructure and systems to facilitate entrepreneurship. They were about 50 to 100 years behind the rest of Europe. It's hard to see opportunity when you're just trying not to freeze or starve to death. And yeah, Russia was very much like a feudalism. Landowners held all the wealth and didn't give a damn about the welfare of the common folk. This is the major point. Russia didn't turn communist because extreme leftists got a voice. It was because things were so bad that the average person literally had nothing to lose. Communism just appealed to people's deep hatred for the upper class, who prospered while everyone else suffered. You also have to understand, people's perspectives are often based off of that they see. When everyone around you is fighting to stay alive, then having a small farm which is enough to keep yourself and your family afloat often seems more than enough. We generally don't realize this today because we're so insanely well off today compared to people 100 years ago. Societies become more developed as they move away from agriculture and towards industry as the primary means of production. It makes sense. First you make sure there's food, then you can worry about having things. In Russia, the farmers who were sustaining themselves actually were the entrepreneurs. And they weren't even really rich. They just weren't starving. But they were better off than their peers, and they were the first targets of the communist revolution. Ironically, they were also the ones feeding everyone, so when they got purged, the commies basically shot themselves in the foot. Maybe we can capitalize on this. Put together little Marxism survival starter kits, but they're actually highly profitable turnkey entrepreneurial businesses. That'll teach em. Mew ahahaha. I read somewhere that monarchies before actually hate capitalism because it threatens their class structure where the monarch can safely safeguard his throne. I just realize it. At least for the Russians, communists didn't fight capitalism but monarchy. And clearly they're different structures. Monarchies has a class structure that safeguards the monarch. Capitalism cuts this structure off and gives way to those who are willing to risk and work hard, meaning any people can be as rich as a monarch. Of course, kings won't like this. This needs to exist. This is true. They did not overthrow a capitalist society in Russia. The problem with both monarchy and socialism or communism is control over property. Only in classical liberal societies are rights to property, land and chattel enforced more or less equally among classes. In monarchic systems, there is an elite class that can own land and make claims, and lesser classes that generally cannot. Even merchant trade was seen as a threat to this structure, but by the late Middle Ages mercantilism was too powerful to stop. In Marxist systems, the theory is essentially for elites to hold all property and land in trust for the collective. Unfortunately, the net result of this is totalitarian power for a few elites. Secondary result is deplorable mismanagement, because the elites, even if they were benevolent, simply don't know enough to manage the thousands of farms, factories, and distribution points that would normally for us be handled by thousands of specialized people with knowledge and skills related to their jobs. This is why Lenin, as much as he hated business people, actually had to let them out of jail and put them back in business. It was that or more starvation. Lenin's policies killed a sobering number of people through starvation, just as most other Marx-inspired leaders did. And once again, this is why we all need to get good at business and stay that way. Let's go save the world from communism, folks. That's an interesting point. Capitalism is interesting because it has changed forms over the years. For example, in the British Empire, merchants had enormous power that business owners in America today could only dream of. East India Trading Company literally started wars. However, the flip side to that is it had to serve the crown, and everyone has to know their place. Modern capitalism is based on the idea that all are equal, and everyone having the opportunity to start a business is better for society. However, this is heavily debated, and many particularly left-leaning scholars will say colonialism was just capitalism on steroids. There are some good arguments for that. Chiquita Fruit Company, for example, but referring to the British again, their society started to become freer once modern capitalism became more prominent. Maybe something similar could have happened in Russia too, because once serfdom was abolished, the lives of the former serfs actually were getting better. However, Russia was still undeveloped and most people in poverty. Add war to the mix and you have a lot of angry people. The funny thing is though, it was not even the workers who revolted. Lenin and Trotsky were privileged, middle-class intellectuals, and the bulk of their fighting force were disgruntled imperial soldiers who were fed up with the current dynasty. I'm sure the Romanovs would have been happy if Russia became a thriving capitalist monarchy, but when a county is that unstable, who have various douchebags all jockeying for power. Lol, I didn't know he had nickname Nicholas the Bloody, had to check why, and History Channel website said anyways. There is one huge difference between Russia and feudalism. In feudalism the lords, landowners, etc. were the law, but in Russia there was an actual Russian government above the landowners. Similar to slave plantations in the United States. Slaves answered to the owner, but the owner still lived under federal and state law. Just goes to show how complex things are. Well, Lenin only got to be in power because people were already dying from starvation, cause there were too many people and not enough land to farm, and as we know the landowners gave zero FCKS about the masses. It was a catastrophic situation all around, hence the revolution. The Communist Party did that whole farm collectivization approach because that was their strategy to produce enough to feed everyone. It's easy to look back now and criticize their strategic decisions, but I really don't feel Lenin was some evil hole who wanted to starve people to death. You got it right about the problems of managing the country. Russia was fucking huge. I believe over 160 million people fell under its jurisdiction. I can't even begin to imagine what a challenge it was to govern all that back in early 1900s. You know what's funny? I've learned way more about feudalism today than the average person ever needs to lol. Anyways, I had to do some quick research on feudalism in Russia. I think in general it was pretty similar to other countries in Europe at the time, but like you said, the Emperor of Russia seemed to have a lot more centralized power. Russia was an absolute monarchy until 1906, which basically meant the emperor could do whatever the hell he wanted to anymore, and no one had a right to say no. Britain had been a constitutional monarchy for hundreds of years at that time, so the nobles had a lot more power. It's interesting that the emancipation of the serfs happened before it got changed to a constitutional monarchy. So even when people were supposedly free, the emperor could probably order your death for looking at him the wrong way. Doesn't sound like a fun place to live. Well, Stalin sure was. Yay, probably it was a government that still had the Tsar have the final veto and control of decisions. And he had divine rule and all that, so yay. Well, if it wasn't for Stalin we might all be speaking German now, except for me, cause the Nazis would have killed my great-grandparents. So I can't really hate on the guy. I am boggled at how that man was able to turn revolutionary peasant Russia into a force powerful enough to turn back the Nazis at Stalingrad, and create Soviet superpower after the war. And he wasn't even Russian. No, Lenin did not necessarily to starve people. Maybe the more inconvenient ones, but not all of them. He did murder people if they were suspected of disagreeing with him though, so let's stop short of making him a saint. He wasn't better than previous leaders, and he was worse than quite a few. It was easy to criticize their strategic decisions, even at the time. Not just looking back. They put the people who knew how to do things in jail, or killed them. The natural result was that those things were not done anymore. People looking from the sidelines understood this if they weren't part of the propaganda, but the ones implementing it, perhaps, thought their ideas would just make everything work. This is the problem, and the danger. People who just believe that their ideas will work on a large scale, without any knowledge or skills other than murdering dissenters, and without the consent of the people who pay the price for their actions, are by definition who starve people to death. We don't really need to apologize for people like Lenin and Mao and Stalin and Pol Pot and insert long list. They're worthless people who caused millions of deaths that would not have happened otherwise. I'm sure some of them had unhappy childhoods that I could be made to sympathize with, but it frankly doesn't excuse their choices as adults. All of them presided over rapid declines in population, or quality of life, or both. And it was simply because they wanted power and control over other people, and followed a philosophy that makes no room for individual rights. Well, other than their own right to rule over other people, which was effectively unlimited. They were hypocrites who railed against kings in order to make themselves kings. Sorry. I hate to take a thread that's about should I start a business, even though the communists might take over and turn it into a history or philosophy talk. But we can't just start making excuses for totalitarian murderers and leave it at that. That's seriously step one toward what the op is worried about. It's what is about. It's what is about. It's incompatible with capitalism, free trade, business, family success, you having any liberty. Next we'll be defending the most infamous, whose name I have intentionally not mentioned since every unpopular political leader is inevitably compared to him. It's okay, we can just call them all worthless jackasses. Big reason for this. People didn't have rights. Yes, there was snow and ice and whatever. But people couldn't make things. Wherever you free people up to build, experiment, exercise free will, you find entrepreneurship and opportunity. Russia was behind because it didn't have an elected parliament and people were not free to choose anything. Profession, location, education, etc. That was the root of its problems, more than the weather. So the point is, now exercise your right to own property in your own name, to trade, to make profit off of your own work, your own risk, to give your children a better start than you had, etc., so that we can continue to as a species, and maybe one day overcome these self-inflicted mental disorders we call political ideologies. Has anybody read Animal Farm by George Orwell? This was a high school requirement. True. Neo-feudalism, communism, ism in general. Move towards the free market. Smile. You stopped short of making Lenin a saint, and reversed deep into worthless people who caused death of millions. I personally looked into these millions dead claims, whether from famines or oppression, gulags, etc., and I have found no consensus that millions died from these things. Apparently a lot of these very high estimates were created during the Cold War, before the Soviet Union collapsed and the archives were made public. Newer research shows the numbers were greatly exaggerated. Yes, they think they want change in our society. What they don't know is how far we've come in just my lifetime. I came from the Ozark Mountains. Many of the people around us didn't have indoor plumbing. My aunt washed the bankers' white shirts in a big black pot over an open fire out in her yard. No, we didn't have TV service available since we were in a rural area. My whole family slept in the guest room downstairs during the winters, which was located off of the family or dining room with the pot-belly stove, our only winter heat. We didn't heat the upstairs with our bedrooms during the winter. We were elite in our town. We had indoor plumbing, but the toilet froze every winter because there was no adequate insulation available for the pipes. I had ear infections, and there were no antibiotics for that problem invented at that time. I had lost 1 or 3 of my hearing by the time I was in 2nd grade from those untreated infections. And that's not the half of it. In contrast, I live like a queen today. Due to capitalism. These liberals just haven't had to work hard at the basics. My life has made me really tough. They're a bunch of snowflakes. They think they know what they want. When things don't go their way, they will fold their hand. Carry on with creating your business. It's the most powerful thing you can do. It's a well-known fact that Lenin used to be a landowner himself and sued starving farmers for stealing crops from his land during famine. Lenin didn't give a fuck about people, rich or poor. He hated people in general. Good base for a totalitarian regime, don't you think? But it's probably a lie spread by the CIA. You think living under the Nazi regime would be worse than living under Soviet regime? Please talk to some people in Europe that saw both. If Stalin didn't have millions of men to use as cannon fodder, we wouldn't even talk about Stalin right now. That and because the Germans heavily underestimated the long and bad supply lines like Napoleon did. After the war he was celebrated as a hero because he stopped the Germans. Well, sorry to bust your Stalin ideal, but he sucked. Soviet army was terrible. They couldn't even beat a minuscule Finnish army. That's just classic Soviet heroism propaganda that is apparently still stuck in your brain. You looked into those one by one. And then you assumed it didn't happen. This is identical behavior as neo-Nazis denying Holocaust. It doesn't fit in your opinion, so let's just ignore cold hard facts. It doesn't matter if they killed millions, or hundreds of thousands or hundreds even. They were tortured, raped, killed, because they had other ideas. Or because somebody else said they had other ideas. Isn't that enough? Now I remember why you were on my ignore list. You are a Soviet crime denier. I don't understand what you're still doing here on an entrepreneur forum. You'd make a great political commissar in North Korea under Kim Jong-un, the great hero who won World War III with nuclear superior weapons against US and A from Trump. Love your attitude. However, it never stopped any politician from doing a stupid thing. These guys are not the best in responsibility. Overthinking it. First of all, nothing being proposed by the radical left is all that radical. A 70% top marginal income bracket is too high to be effective. We can use evidence for this, but it's hardly radical. Also, anything the left proposes tends to be attacked by democracy's immune system. It's actually questioned. Sanders says Medicaid for all and shows us 90 pages, and months later world-class economists from across the spectrum release a dizzying array of reports. I'd be much more concerned with far-right populism, $1.5 trillion deficit hole over 10 years to give tax cuts to people who have movie theaters inside their yachts. Doesn't really help the demand side of things or help bind society together. Everyone yawned at that and it passed overnight. Either way though, you should ignore it. Saying it's the red or blue team's fault you aren't rich is an excuse. Plenty of fast learners in Nordic countries with socialist programs, plenty in countries with universal healthcare. Plenty of fast learners in shitty third world countries too. You think they made money worrying about which dictator was vying for power in their shitty banana republic, or by keeping themselves focused on the end goal? What? Google 20th century democide. Read it and weep. Communism has killed more people than all modern wars combined. To all you naysayers on here, just remember that Hitler was democratically elected. The populace is stupid and miseducated by design. Is right. It's the voters that you should be worried about, not the politicians. This is why America was never intended to be a democracy in the first place, and technically it still isn't. CNN would have you believe otherwise. However, check this pompous jackass out. The CNBC host does a decent job of telling it like it is. But wow. First of all, this guy names his tax and spend liberal organization Patriotic Millionaires as if people that don't share his viewpoint are unpatriotic. He is using his status and wealth to pontificate for all the millionaires his own personal socialistic political views. I find this guy morally reprehensible. Let's talk about patriotism. One of the very premises this country was founded on was because of the taxation from England with no representation. It was one of the reasons for the Revolutionary War. The 99% all but admit they want to take from the 1% steal at gunpoint. Where is the representation for the 1%? Don't tell me it is this fat FK. Now in 2019, we have ideologue billionaires like Warren Buffett literally speaking for millionaires, people worth thousands of times less than him. We have jackasses like the guy in this video thinking it is virtuous to surrender more money to a black hole, but is also too stupid to realize that there is zero connection between wealth redistribution and the advancement of society. Very few would disagree that we have a pretty great standard of living in the USA. Possibly the best of the larger countries in the world. That said, my question for him would be this. What drove our country to this point? No one in the US needs to go hungry, very few do. No one in the US works in working conditions like that of just 50 years ago. No one in the US is forced to work long hours. Very few that are truly willing to work are unemployed. Employees are buying big beautiful homes with very little sacrifice or risk. They are driving luxurious automobiles and flying on airplanes to go on nice vacations every year. They are playing golf. They are eating at restaurants. Leisure has never been more attainable and people are healthier and happier than ever before. Ask a working class guy from the 1950s what his lifestyle looked like. It was quite different. Did government do this? Hell no. The reason for this constant improvement. Free market capitalism. Government does not advance society. Evil, greedy, capitalist pigs advance society. Capitalism begot machinery that reduced human workload. Capitalism harnessed the energy stored in fuels to further reduce workload and light our homes. Capitalism begot railways that spread economies far and wide. Capitalism begot cars that made capitalist exchange even more efficient within city centers. Capitalism made air travel affordable for the masses. Capitalism begot technology that turned us into an information sector economy. Capitalism has cured and continues to cure diseases. Capitalism creates the value that employs people, even government indirectly. Capitalism is virtuous. Win-win. Trade-up value exchanges create opportunity for everyone. All along the way there was a producer that made a killing off of each and every one of these advancements. They deserve it. What has the government done? Bombs people, jails citizens, blows resources on frivolous endeavors, death marches our soldiers into battle, kills mostly minority unborn babies, regulates and creates expensive compliance issues, writes us speeding tickets, indoctrinates our children, makes trying to capitalism a world forward a living hell, and they charge us 40 to 60% of everything we earn for the privilege. So much for progressivism. All of this said, the facts are there. The money is much better left with us greedy capitalists. So build the most audacious pile of money you possibly can. Be an evil producer. Capitalistically exchange your way to the biggest business you possibly can build. Along the way you will provide means for all of your employees and value to your customers and shareholders. The value you provide the world is exponential. The working class value is linear. The undeniable fact is that the world is better for your efforts. Don't ever let a fat, pompous, communist FK tell you otherwise. Never see these truths. Amen. I don't think it could be said better. Too bad you'll be labeled a bigot, racist, misogynist for believing such things. The government will play a role, but you're mostly right. Unless you're in a country with collapsed economy or under a heavy dictatorship, think of North Korea, you have a chance to be in the fast lane or be a fast learner. I also worry about these, too. Here in the Philippines, at least based on personal experience, there are growing sentiments of socialism and communism around. Hatred towards the capitalists, which is unfortunately fueled by some big corporations here who do squeeze their workers, and the pressing poverty we have so far, contributes to all of these. To make things worse, at least again based on personal experience, many people here keeps blaming the government and businesses for their problems but never look at themselves. Try to talk them out of their money problem, and they'll tell you something like, "Oh, you just don't understand me since you're from the middle or upper class." Then they'll return to their old ugly habits, never save money, for example. To be fair, we are indeed a poor but developing country. But I can't just stand anymore the fact that the victim and slave mentality is in our culture. Okay, I'm ranting now. There are Filipino fast learners who came from poverty. So think about this, from a poor or developing country plus poor person equals able to become a fast learner. One of my favorite stories of a once car wash guy who made it in millions just out of savvy and hard work. His name is Edma, and his story is featured in a news article. But I personally don't know the guy, but would love to. At the time, he can't afford college out of poverty, so he just ended up a high school graduate. Of course, his best chances of a job are the shitty ones. He served as a waiter in various fast food chains before he became a car wash guy. By the way, being a car wash guy here is so shitty that working as a waiter in a fast food chain is probably more respectable. When he got the chance to study at TESDA, a government program aimed to hone skills for poor people, he used the skill he learned, something about barista, to start a business. TESDA gives P8,000 or around $160 once you finished their programs. It can be a big money here. Together with a few of his savings plus P8,000, he was able to start a food cart business selling coffee and chocolate shakes. That's the beginning of his fast lane business. He worked hard at first, but ultimately he's able to expand it and hire people to work for him. Sure, he had ups and downs. At one point, he almost lost all his money, but managed to get back on top. Now, he's a millionaire with I think 2 cars and a nice home. A once poor guy, living in a third world country, now a rich guy. By the way, he probably doesn't even think about being rich. He just wants to get out of poverty. In fact, on his first day in business, he expects a P2,000 $40 in gross revenue. Guess what, though? He made it to P12,000,240. I second with that regardless of your government and where you are, and I'll assume you live in a fairly democratic country, you have a chance to be in the fast lane. This makes my day, month, maybe year. Remind me I owe you lunch if we ever meet in person. Let them. No one takes that Stroman-Alinskyite shit seriously anymore anyway. They've cried wolf 10 million too many times. The meanings of those words are so tamped down by modern news it is ridiculous. Pow. Winning comment. The majority, who walk on the sidewalk and drive in the slow lane, are also the majority that vote on everything else. The erratic majority can't handle their own personal economics, let alone vote on everyone else's. Doesn't have to be liberal or Democrat to be anti-capitalist. All these rednecks around me are as hard Republican as they can be, but will destroy our economy with the same ignorance they use to mismanage themselves. All they know is that they want more for them and less for you, and they need to see vindication to feel better about themselves. Even the ones who are self-employed hate entrepreneurs that are doing well. They're too ignorant to scale their own businesses, so they'll complain and vote to have anyone doing better than them destroyed with taxation. Their votes scare me, but that's democracy. No, accept and embrace this, or at least know when to exit the situation. I have noticed the same thing. Stupidity crosses the aisle. I'd say 90% of people are the driving force of our intellectual apocalypse. Wow. Beautiful post. So poor supply lines and millions of poor Russian cannon fodder defeated Nazis. Okay, if you say so. I didn't make my arguments personal, but it seems you're going in that direction, so whatever. I can equally say you got McCarthyism and the Red Scare propaganda stuck in your head. As far as entrepreneurship goes, I believe in the freedom to run a business. You won't get any arguments from me on that front. Scorched earth. Ever heard of? Germany, between 4.4m and 5.3m casualties in total in World War II, all fronts. Soviet Union, between 8.6m and 11.4m casualties. Stalin, man of steel, great leader and noble father of all Soviet children. People tend to minimize crimes against humanity for some personal reason. I have nothing personal to do with the Soviet butchery, I just can't stand selective ignorance. Raised and live in Europe. BTW, pretty immune for American indoctrination too. Every country has a blood-soaked history. Geez, one of the kings of my country was responsible for one of the biggest genocides in Africa, Leopold II. Should I just ignore those facts and call him a great man too? I rather don't. But thanks for the brilliant victory, Stalin. Europe loves you. Eastern Europe was so much better off with your Red Terror. It was a lot more than 11m. The Nazis were trying to commit genocide on the Russians. The whole more bullets than people is propaganda. I visited historical forums who debated this topic. In reality, by 1940 the Soviet army was industrialized and had plenty of bullets to go around. I'm telling you, I don't believe the Soviet regime casualty numbers thrown out there. There's not even a consensus. You see death counts ranging from less than 10 million to Afghan 80 million. Honestly, the only reason I ever got curious about how evil Stalin and Soviet Union really was because it's been pretty brutally demonized. As a Russian, I just needed to see the evidence for myself. I started Googling this stuff with an open mind. If it was really that bad, then okay, history is history. But honestly, all I saw was even a lack of consensus on the casualty numbers themselves. I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle. Obviously there's no world powers out there that are soft and fluffy all around. As far as Iron Curtain, yeah, I bet there were nationalists in the Soviet bloc who wanted full independence for their countries. At the same time, there were plenty who felt the communists were liberators and wanted to be part of the Soviet Union. It's not all black and white. I'm sure some people in Hawaii and Puerto Rico feel the same way about the United States, but it is what it is. Those numbers were military casualties only. That was a joke that you are taking literally. Yes, Soviet army was industrialized, badly, like the rest of their industry. They were incompetent as FCK. Here's some more numbers about the superior Red Army in 1940. I'm telling you, numbers of the victims of his terror regime aren't even relevant. Same argument is often used by neo-Nazis denying the Holocaust. What does matter is that people were killed for not supporting the state, which is pure terror. If you're okay with that, you are probably living in the wrong state. Like I said, selective ignorance. You believe what you want to believe. Because you want to believe it. It fits in your vision. That's what most people do. If you would start this Googling stuff with an open mind, you would at least admit that he caused serious crimes against humanity. I can find evidence on Google that the Holocaust was a hoax. But I choose not to believe those. Why? Because people that spread those sources have agendas, like spreading hate to other cultures and people. Interpreting history means you question all sources, apart from your own opinion. And 99% of also Russian historians agree that the Stalin regime was pure terror. But those 1% probably speaks the truth for you. Fine. So one side is nationalist and the other side is communist. Seems like you yourself are seeing it black and white. The liberators become occupiers. Most people just wanted to get rid of the totalitarian regime that was orchestrated from Moscow. Want examples? Prague Spring, Hungarian Revolution, Poznan protests. Of course, all followed by a bloodbath. Those weren't just nationalists. They were being occupied by the Soviets for almost 50 years, just like the Nazis occupied countries for 4 to 5 years. Nationalism was fed by this, yes. Soviets were even deporting whole families to gulags just for being Latvian, Estonian, Polish, or whatever. These are known facts. The few ones that supported the communists had usually good reasons for that, like having a good job or getting some favors. Seriously, if it was all that good, they wouldn't ditch this red terror like all those countries did starting 1989. Perhaps you should go see for yourself and go visit Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, Ukraine and see what this red terror did with those people instead of doing serious research on Google safely behind your computer. Let's step back and ask ourselves, are we wasting time here arguing over invalid SHT instead of furthering our fast lane ventures? Jim Rohn, don't major in minor things. Moving on. Read Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal by Ayn Rand if you want to understand the issue better. Just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. Pericles, I am interested in politics so that one day I do not have to be interested in politics. Ayn Rand. Lol, I don't know much at all about the Finland Winter War. If the Finns went beast mode, it is what it is. The Soviet war machine eventually became beast mode too, powerful enough to push back the Nazis and change the course of the war at Stalingrad. I don't see the incompetence here. Unless you gonna gloss over and hand wave away the real-life complexity of war. Man, people can get killed for not supporting the state anywhere, any country. I'm not surprised that in the incredibly volatile post-revolutionary wartime climate of Eastern Europe that shit like that can and did happen. That doesn't make the day-to-day life in the Soviet Union some kind of living hell. Comparing Soviet Union to Holocaust and Stalin to Hitler is fucking ridiculous. Lol, it's absurd. Of course some people saw the liberators as occupiers. That's just how it is. We ain't exactly giving back the lands of Texas and California back to Mexico either, but when Soviet Union won't let go of all the lands it beat the Nazis on, now it's an evil empire. Feels like a double standard. You can tell me the numbers of how many people were sent to gulags, for what reasons, how long, and how many were released. These numbers also don't have a consensus. The fall of Soviet Union in 1991 was indeed a failure due to deep corruption in the leadership, and the 90s in Russia were all as hell. That's why I'm not all excited about the idea of another Soviet Union. I like free market capitalism. I believe there's a middle ground somewhere that is the right answer. Nuff said. Lol, okay, agree to disagree then. Let's get back to our respective businesses and call it a day. And the majority of the public would be very surprised to learn that even the poor pay taxes, not income tax, but FICA and other stuff if they dare to be self-employed. Not only is it a tax crime to be wealthy, it's also a tax crime to be self-employed at any level of income. If you're self-employed, you can literally make $2,000 in a year in income and still pay taxes. At any rate, to the op, turn off the noise. If you don't pay attention to what the new media says, your life will be far better and you will realize that you don't have to have the limitations they place on you. Spend your time reading offline stuff instead. Or, if you must be online, be on YouTube or Udemy learning something. I know people who have developed severe anxiety from their obsession with the news and the pop culture world, and everything that the news people tell them is wrong with the country, the world, or themselves, and have had to be medicated. It can literally make you sick. Turn it off. Hey man, my first question, if I may ask, as I don't know much about you, and you don't know about me, are you a billionaire or over $100 million worth? Yep. Couldn't agree more. We need to be reasonable with it too. Not privy to all the details of the NYC or Amazon debacle, but I'm guessing it went a little like this. Amazon, we will give you $25 if you cut us a $12 tax break. A net of $13. NYC? Sounds like a win-win. Anti-capitalists, no, we want all $25. Amazon, FCKU. Now you get nothing. A big fat zero. Anti-capitalists, we win. Scary that these people hold high offices. Boeing does international water deliveries in the sky now to avoid Washington state sales tax. They offered like $20 to $50,000 in sales tax per plane because the whole debacle of flying to international waters costs about that. Washington state said no and wanted their whole 8% or whatever. Boeing says okay, FCKU, we will sign papers and deliver over open ocean. So they do. Washington gets nothing. Go Boeing. It is about time governments start competing for the opportunity. And that a certain one who supposedly has an economics degree thought that the incentive was $3 billion in cash that could be reallocated. Reminds me of a story I heard somewhere about 5 people go to dinner. Beauty of Google, here it is, seems to be a couple of similar versions of the story each and every day. 10 men go to a restaurant for dinner together. The bill for all 10 comes to $100 each day. If the bill were paid the way we pay our taxes, the first 4 would pay nothing, the 5th would pay $1, the 6th would pay $3, the 7th $7, the 8th $12, the 9th $18. The 10th man, the richest, would pay $59. Although the 10 men didn't share the bill equally, they all seemed content enough with the arrangement, until the restaurant owner threw them a curve. "You're all very good customers," the owner said, "so I'm going to reduce the cost of your daily meal by $20. I'm going to charge you just $80 in total." The 10 men looked at each other and seemed genuinely surprised, but quite happy about the news. The first 4 men, of course, are unaffected because they weren't paying anything for their meals anyway. They'll still eat for free. The big question is how to divvy up the $20 in savings among the remaining 6 in a way that's fair for each of them. They realized that $20 divided by 6 is $3.33, but if they subtract that amount from each person's share, then the 5th and 6th men would end up being paid to eat their meals. The restaurant owner suggested that it would be fair to reduce each person's bill by roughly the same percentage, and he proceeded to work out the amounts that each should pay. The results. The 5th man paid nothing, the 6th pitched in $2, the 7th paid $5, the 8th paid $9, the 9th paid $14, leaving the 10th man with a bill of $50 instead of $59. Outside the restaurant, the men began to compare their savings. "I only got $1 out of the $20, said the 6th man, pointing to the 10th man, "and he got $9. "Yeah, that's right," exclaimed the 5th man. "I only saved $1, too. It's not fair that he got 9 times more than me." "That's true," shouted the 7th man. "Why should he get back $9 when I only got $2? The rich get all the breaks." "Wait a minute," yelled the first 4 men in unison. "We didn't get anything at all. The system exploits the poor." The 9 outraged men surrounded the 10th and brutally assaulted him. The next day, he didn't show up for dinner, so the 9 sat down and ate without him. But when it came time to pay the bill, they faced a problem that they hadn't faced before. They were $50 short. End of day. More money, more options. See, large businesses move their company assets from country to country, region to region if the laws, taxes are better elsewhere. Can only enjoy that freedom if have the means to afford it. So get to that point as soon as you can, and less to worry about. Republicans will continue to virtue signal and preach "I'm not racist" and new constitution or individualism. Meanwhile, Democrats will continue to play identity politics and import their voters who will demographically replace us. Texas, Arizona, Georgia, and Florida will be Democrat within 10 years. It will be interesting to see what white men do when they finally wake up to the fact that Western civilization has been stolen from them. I think over the long term capitalism will change. Politics have become very polarized in America. It will change with new laws and regulations. A government will always assert its existence and will always make new laws on top of the new laws it has already made. Capitalism works when people are aware, ethical and innovative, and when markets are free. In the past people have not been ethical, so the government has stepped in and made laws and regulations. The wrong laws and regulations hurt our economy. It's just not so obvious because economics is complex. You know? I've been thinking for a while that the movie Elysium is a good depiction of how the world is going to be in the future. I think that politicians and intellectuals are going to play the diversity is our strength game to the extreme, trying hard to manipulate minorities who later will become the majority just to gain more power. One day people will be so fed up that will go away, and people from all over the world will reunite together and create a new community that can grow to a new nation. And then the countries they left will collapse because they're full of irresponsible, lazy idiots who can't do SH1T. And what comes after that? The Hunger Games. Because of course wealthy people are evil and the root cause of everything wrong in society. This should be a required reading in every humanities or social science courses and degrees. As far as my experience goes, those courses praises leftist ideologies but doesn't give any justice to rightist or even centrist philosophies. We are taught Marxism. We are even required to read Marx's book or selected parts, Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto. But so far, none of these classes talk about the benefits of capitalism, or the consequences of Marxism, or the importance of liberty in our society and as individuals. To think about it, capitalism together with ideologies founded by liberty like democracy is the only ideology that truly liberated people so far. As mentioned before, common people won't do well in pre-capitalist societies. A serf will always be a serf. He can't strike out on his own and be his own boss. Today, what is as freeing as capitalism? As I know it, none. Yet. It really makes me scratch my head when professors say capitalism enslaves people, the workers. Like, really? Then they'll go on to praise communism, lol. I don't understand why they don't see what fundamentally separates capitalism from others. I didn't know the word capitalism was coined by the Marxists. Thanks for that. Yes, that's true. Marxists believe that if the environment is a major factor in the attitude of a person, so he's like wanting to re-engineer the society for his utopic vision. On the other hand, Marx talks about his theory on classless society, which I think, for him, is the final achievement of communism. This is where true communism begins. As far as I remember, he simply wants all societal structures be gone because it's the root of all capital acquisition and the inequality between the upper and lower. Sure, the caveman do have a classless society, but did he forget that people will eventually form a society based on your class? And, if anything, capitalism has actually shattered this strict class system. For example, a worker can strike on his own by becoming an entrepreneur. A serf, on the other hand, is bound to be a serf until he dies or unless his master graciously free him, which would be very rare. Do anyone notice that stories of rags to riches or being self-made only applies to a free society? Right. The idea of self-made or riches is fundamentally threatening to a Marxist ideology, even the final communist utopia. Marxism is a collectivist philosophy, where individuals aren't to be empowered. Ultimately, this means that someone who is dissatisfied with the collective state of things is a bad actor. Government implementations of Marxism will imprison or execute such an individual as a threat. After all, they apparently aren't happy with the monoclass state of society. Therefore they pose a risk to that carefully constructed state. It's amazing how clearly this comes out in Marx-inspired political writings. Mussolini wrote about the abnegation, or deletion, of the self. You must sacrifice yourself for the good of all. Individualism is the enemy of Marxism, plain and simple. Serfs, when they were freed, was likely when the master no longer wanted to support them. Basically, they got too old or broken down to work, then they were freed, like a lame horse, or a chicken that doesn't lay eggs. Actually, I think this is the default tragedy that occurs when individuals are not given rights. They can't have anything, can't build any assets, so they are at the mercy of whoever has the power. Doesn't matter what system you're in, feudal, Marxist, or otherwise. When they can't work at the same level of productivity anymore, they are discarded. The more cruel collectivist systems might even come up with creative solutions for this. For example, Nazi Germany infamously had posters urging people to turn in cripples and elderly people because, well, they took up resources. We had a war to win, and a society to build, after all. How selfish for one person to want to eat, when it slowed everyone down. Always zero-sum because Marx resources and production and trade. Always doing great harm to people in weak social position because the collective in practice appointed to whatever the leader wants is infinitely more important than the individual. The collective has rights which are exercised the individual. The individual has no rights, or very few. Riches? Gosh no. In most systems, you won't find an individual with riches unless they control the government. While a system reserves rights for the individual, the others reserve nearly all rights for a king, an elite class, or the so-called collective. I'm sorry, this can't be serious. Capitalism is here to stay. The real issue I find isn't so much with capitalism. At least what real capitalism is. Personally, I am also okay with certain levels of marketeering as well, but I can also understand the anger some people have for that. The larger issue really is by the hands of the government. The socio-economic systems are essentially used as scapegoats by many at this point. However, before I go full Alex Jones, I better digress. If tomorrow you wake up to anarchy, the dollar is $0, and there is chaos everywhere you look, you will still need to adapt and find a way to make it in this world.